My story goes way back 75 years ago. That tells you what age I am. And my mother was a hotel owner in Killybegs, Donegal, and her husband had died, a very young man. Anyway, and she continued running the hotel, which was very brave of her as a woman. And in the meantime, there was a lot of work needed to be done down at the pier. And they brought a group of engineers or workers or whatever to do the work. And they used to frequent the hotel. And one of them had a little twinkle in his eye for my mother, and she likewise. And they used to meet secretly. And that time she had 4 children, one died, 3 children away at boarding schools. So she was kind of, in some ways, free while people ran the hotel. And she got pregnant. And she didn't want anybody to know that she was pregnant. But I think the world and his granny knew. And she travelled to Belfast, out of sight. And she signed herself into a private nursing home in Clifton Street, which is off Carlisle Circus. And my father used to come up and visit her every weekend, and he wanted to marry her. But she wasn't having it. However, he decided, I'm out of here, because he was a single man, and men in those days didn't have enough say regarding the birth of babies. And then he was told that by my mother, the baby's adopted. So he really was stuck. And she went back to Donegal and left the baby, me, at St. Joseph's Orphanage, which was on the Ravenhill Road. It's long gone. It shouldn't have gone a long time ago, but anyway. And shortly after that, I was placed for adoption with a family in Ansborough, which is County Donegal, I think, and probably had a happy childhood. I was only a little thing. But after 14 months, I was taken from the family and put back into St. Joseph's and then on to Nazareth House, the nursery. And I was 2 years of age. And then when you reach 5, you come out of the nursery and went to the children's department. It's just known as the children's department. And we were placed in groups. There was over 100 girls from everywhere. And you were given a number. And my number was 51. I wouldn't even use it in the lotto. But anyway, and there were about 20 odds, maybe up to 30 odds in each group. We did all the cleaning. All our meals were taken in silence. We might as well have been the novices, but I think I was traumatised big time, because I was one of the ones that wet the bed, and I used to rock myself to sleep. Whether that was a comfort, whether that was, I don't know. The psychologist will tell you that. And I absolutely hated the place, hated it. And every morning I had to go down to the bathrooms. There were 3 big bathrooms, and rinse my sheets out in cold water and take them to the laundry. And the laundry was outside the building, but within reach. And there was a lady there, she used to sit on it like a rocking chair. And to me, an old lady, and an old cat around her. And she'd say, put them in the bucket, put them in the bucket. And I heard that every morning for years and years. Well, they were in the bucket quicker than you could say Jack Russell. She didn't do me any harm. Fair play to her. But the older girls, I used to see how they were scared of her. Everything was scary, if you know what I mean. And we were up at Mass every morning, break of dawn, praying. I hadn't a clue who I was praying to, because a lot of the praying was in Latin. I could hardly speak English, never mind Latin. And then every so often we used to have retreats. Made no sense to me. Nothing was explained. And then the formal education was within that building, and I was put into the backward class. There was about nearly 20 or 30 of us in the backward class. We learned very, very little. The nun that took it was a nun called Elizabeth, fictitious name. And she could lose her temper very easily, and she used to get you and nip you under there. And even in the chapel, if you weren't praying, she'd come up and reach over and nip you. Or pull a little bit of hair at your back of your neck. And that's darn sore, and especially as a little one. We wore pinafores. And every summer, all the dormitories were scrubbed, waxed and polished. But every Friday, we all had to gather in twos. And there was a huge big long corridor, if you could imagine, very long, because it divided the children's department from care of the elderly, and the big kitchens and the parlours. And the only time you went into the parlour was to clean them. And we had to scrub that long corridor every Friday. And another nun, Luke, who I hate to this day, God forgive me, if she's in heaven, I don't want to be in the same room. Let me be somewhere else, or down there. Anyway, I hope she's there. She was the cruelest person I ever met, psychologically, not so much physically. And she never would call me by my name. You say, Madam, Madam. And there was one Friday, we had our own fun, mind you, and there was one Friday I broke the mop, a mop that had been used by probably hundreds of girls from that place, opened in 1897, I think. Wow. And it was a small house to provide refuge for the poor. And there you are, it ended up with over 100 little girls and babies, care of the elderly, big kitchens. Everything was big, and everything we cleaned. Nobody came in from outside, nobody. I learned nothing formally, nothing. There used to be an abacus. Did you ever hear of an abacus?
Beads.
Yes, we used to go 1, 2, 3. Never learned tables. I never learned anything that the kids learn today. And I look at children and I say, I hope you're happy. I hope you're being educated. Because the lack of education damaged my head. Big time.
And yet you wrote your book.
I wrote the book.
You wrote your book.
And even while writing the book, I thought, they're going to find out. They're going to find out. That was a fear. They'll say, sure, you were backward. What would you be writing a book for? That would be the attitude. I know it. I don't know why they became nuns. I think they went into a convent as little girls themselves. And all the neighbours will know, oh, wee Jenny, she's away to be a nun. Oh, wee Tommy's going to be a priest. Well, God help them. They were ruined as well as us. They became trapped. So they took the frustration out in the children. Now, the beatings, they had a habit of beating you just in the front of your arm, the most tender part, and boys, it was sore. Or they used to get your hands like that, your fingers, and hit you across the knuckles. So, or just whack wherever they could whack. The formal education lasted till I was 11. I never had any visitors. I never made close friends of any of the girls, but I was a friend overall, if that makes sense. I was a wee bit of an organiser, and I used to organise the wee games out in the garden. They would never call it the playground. Had to be called the garden. And that was only snobbery. And very little play we did. The food was all right, but if they saw that you had lumpy porridge, which we used to get sometimes it was burnt, but you ate it because you were hungry. But there was a nun there, Sarah, I think her name is, and if she saw you weren't eating, she used to come up with more food on your plate, and you had to eat it. I wasn't one of those girls. I ate all around me. At the age of 11, I was quite sick in the isolation room. I think I had a combination of the measles and German measles. I don't remember seeing a doctor. A big girl used to come in with my food. I saw nobody to play with, and it was lonely. It was lonely. But just before that, I got into trouble, probably very little trouble, and look, she locked me in the storeroom, and I can still see the storeroom, and there was boxes and boxes and boxes. I never looked in them. I climbed on top of them, and I could see out into the playground, garden. All my friends were all playing, and I was stuck up there. Couldn't get going to the toilet. I was there all day, and late at night, the door opened by an older girl, and she said, "Get out." That was the end of that. Anyway, Alice, the rest of my peers were going to the secondary school, which was called St Monica's, on the Ravenhill Road, which was beside the orphanage, St Joseph's. Anyway, I didn't get going. After a few weeks then, I was allowed to go to school and join them. I was only there for I don't even think a few weeks, a very short period of time. And we had a change room where we used to get changed to go to school, and Luke used to stand at the door. I don't know I don't know. She used to watch you, and this day she said, "You get into the sewing room and get your uniform." And I mean, I'm standing in it. There's an example of not being told why, what for, reasons. Anyway, so I went into the sewing room, and there was a wee nun there, and she used to call you girlie. She was old, and she couldn't remember anybody's name. So, girlie, put that on you. You said nothing, you asked nothing. So I put this uniform on. I knew, even at the age of 11, I knew I was going to the school for the backward ones. And it was called Immaculata, and it was out at White Abbey. And there was 5 of us. Had to get that bus every morning shortly after 8 and travel to White Abbey. It was a big boarding school for girls, ESN, educationally subnormal. And that's how it was classed. It's a beautiful boarding school. I wanted to board in it because the matron that was in charge of the boarders was lovely. And I could see and watch her kindness to them. But I just went to school, learned very little, as you can imagine. The school for special needs in today's standards. But the nun that taught me there was a nun called Sister Annunciata. That's her real name. And she's 94. And she's now in a nursing home. And I used to go and see her all the time. She was very good. I liked her. And we were coming out of the classroom one day, and she said, "Marie Therese, where's your mummy?" And I looked at her, I said, "I haven't got a mummy," and walked on. Now, I'd only started the school, and we were all in the dining room, and Sister Elizabeth came in, called me out in front of everybody, brought me up to the bathroom, and I was washed from head to toe. And we weren't allowed to look in the mirrors. There was like perspex, and if they saw you look in the mirror, they'd have got your ear and pulled you out of the bathroom or given you a good slap. across the face, you know. But I did look, and I saw a child with a green dress, and that was me. And I thought, oh my God, I'm going home. I don't know where home was, because I didn't understand the significance of home. But I thought that. And I was marched up to the classroom, and there were 4 big classrooms, and one of the doors was ajar, and Elizabeth was standing there, and she said, who's that in there, who's that? And I said, I don't know. We used to say pleaster. We didn't even say sister. We spoke that fast. Fear. We didn't even say yes, we said yeah. We didn't say no, we said no. That's to this day, we would still say it. And anyway, she said, go and see who it is. And when I went in, it was a teacher. It wasn't the matron, it was a teacher, Mrs. McHugh. She's long dead, who'd come to see me. I couldn't believe it. I thought, this lady's come to see me. She gave me a little bag of sweeties. And after a couple of minutes, she was leaving. I didn't know how to ask her anything. I had no social skills. So after it anyway, I come back, and Elizabeth is still standing there. Who was that? Oh, I said, Mrs. McHugh from school. Get that dress off you. And I went back into the old dresses and the pinafore. In the winter, we couldn't keep our sleeves down. We had to roll our sleeves up to be ready for work. And in the winter, a group of us would have been sent by Look. She doesn't deserve to be called Sister Look, so I'll just say Look. And she used to get a few of us to go down to the laundry and wash all the jumpers. Stand on the platform, and we're only children. I would say probably 11 on to do all that. And we did the same in the summertime, with the dresses in the winter and the jumpers. And I never saw Mrs. McHugh again. I was put into another class. Anyway, that was the standard. I left school at 16. That was because you were special needs. No education. I was only fit to work. And work I did. I had to work around Nazareth House. Whatever I was told to do, I did. And there was another girl who left the same time as me, Angeline. She lives in England, and she'd been at the secondary school. And Luke used to send for Angeline. But what she used to do, she used to get a child out of the classroom to go and look for me and tell me, Sister Luke wants you. I would go down, and in front of all the children in the classroom, she would say, go and get me Angeline. I would go and get Angeline, come back down with her. Oh, Angeline, I would like you to do A, B or C. And she would look at me and say, go you on with your work, madam. So if that's trying to protect a child, educate a child, teach them social skills, tell them about a mother and a father, tell them about puberty. Because at puberty, I was quite sick. I must have a weakness. And Sister Elizabeth, thank God I wasn't in Luke's group. She used to scurry out and put everything in the locker so we could see it. Even before then, everything was a secret. The only thing that wasn't was the praying. I wouldn't have been picked for a choir or anything. And we used to try and do a performance of a concert, and they were good. The kids were good. And I was only picked once. And I was a parson. And I had to stand in front of the stage and twiddle me thumbs. And yet I remembered every word of that wee thing. Do you want me to say it?
Go on.
I used to go to the front dressed as a wee parson, and I would say, Parson Ben said, Brethren, I'll now send round the plate. As this collection is for me, the money I will take in the old top hat. And then you would dance around. Everybody started laughing in the hall, and I thought they were laughing at me. Against me, that I looked so stupid. Now, There was a girl there called Jean. Jean died of cancer, Lord have mercy on her. And her granny and grandfather walked from the Falls Road to Nazareth House every Saturday to see her. And we would be up in the climber. We were used to, we'd say, Jean Hannah, there's your granny. Because she told us it was a granny. I didn't know what a granny was actually. But we used to say, there's your granny. A word was a word with no meaning. And she had wee sweeties one time. And Elizabeth happened to pass. And I said, please dear, where's my mummy? Silly, you've no mummy. Walked on and ignored me. So I didn't ask any more. It was more the psychological and the physical abuse and the lack of care and the lack of love. I never played with a toy. There was business people in Belfast and they were very good. Couldn't fault them. And every Christmas a bus would come up and collect you to go to a party if your name was on the list. I think I went to 2 parties. A lot of the other girls who were little pets, but I didn't give a damn, went to all different parties. I think I was just too scared and too quiet. So I can't forget the Belfast people for doing that. So before writing the book, I was sent out to service. And I was there 3 months and I scarpered. And I walked the streets. And one of the nuns begged me to go back. And I went back simply because I was hungry. And then I went to lodge on the Lisburn Road. It used to be called lodgings, to a family who also took advantage of me. My money was handed to them every week from working in the factory. The woman that owned the house used to come for the money. Anyway, I was with them for nearly 21 years. I couldn't get away from them. I couldn't tell anybody where I came from because I was scared. I had no answers. Now, this is where it starts. While working in the factory one day, Mr. Lyons came in and he said, Marie, you follow me. I ignored him for a few seconds and he turned the machine off and he said, come on. I was petrified. And I followed him out to a room. It was like a big, I don't know, boardroom or something. And there was a lady standing there and I thought I don't know her, but the door was closed. And this lady went on, oh, I'm here on behalf of your mother. You know, your mother's a very busy lady, blah, 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 blah. Everything went over my head. I was only 18 years of age. But as she was leaving the room, she handed me a piece of paper. And it was actually a photograph of a lady who, I presume, was my mother. She didn't say. She just said, you might like this. I might as well have been in Muckamore Abbey because I knew nothing. I asked nothing, but shortly after that, that played in my mind, who was this lady? And then I developed anorexia because I didn't want to live. That lady came to the factory, would have had to tell the manager why she was there when nobody knew about me. And I thought, those nuns are bitches. And I just got thinner and thinner. I didn't want to live, Alice. What was life doing to me? Nothing. I was working in a factory, I was living in lodgings, people who had no interest but money. I couldn't tell anybody my background. Now, after leaving those people, I know I'm jumping the gun here, I went into nursing, believe it or not, for ESN. I went into nursing in 1980 and I was as happy as a pig in muck. And before that I worked in Fever Park Hospital as an orderly and I loved it. I was working with little babies. I was scared to touch them, but I loved it. Now, During my nursing, I developed back problems. And as a child, I fell through a fire escape. It was an old loft and had an old rusted fire escape. And I fell through it on my back. Whether that was the start, I don't know. I have no answers. However, and while I was recovering from my spinal surgeries, I decided to write the book. And Sister Annunciata used to come and see me every so often. And one day she came in and I had all pieces of paper strewn all over the table. And I thought, you must be mad. And she looked and she said, what are you doing? I got scared. And I thought, gee, and I looked at her and I said, do you know what? I'm going to write a book. And she put her hands like that and she said, and you're the person that'll do it. So she had faith in me. She was of a different order. And to me, she was holy. Anyway, I sent the book to Poolbeg in Dublin, the manuscript rather, and they did a reader's report. And it was Kate Cruz O'Brien, Conor Cruz O'Brien's daughter. She did a reader's report, and then I started working more on it. It was nearly 10 years. And I worked on it and I worked on it. At the same time, I decided to write to the nuns asking, would they give me any information that they have on me? I have it all here, and you're very welcome to look at it. You're not going to see it on that, but you can look at it. And I got a piece of paper back to say, she entered Nazareth House at the age of 2, left at the age of 17, and is now lodging with Mr. and Mrs. But their name in the book, they're changed. And Mary is very happy. Mary was not my name. They couldn't even give me my proper name. And one of the Nazareth girls contacted me and said one day, I'm going into the town to get my birth certificate. Do you want yours? I didn't know what a birth certificate was. I played dumb and I said, aye, I'll go in with you. I got my birth certificate. Mother's name, father's name, none. But yet, on my baptism lines, it was my father who was really present at my baptism. So that's the time I thought, my mother, you're in trouble, because I wanted to kill her. I thought, how dare you? And there was 2 colleagues that I worked with. I decided to confide in them. And they were very good, and even to this day they're very good. I kept writing to Sister Elizabeth, asking questions. I kept asking and asking and asking. And one of the letters I said, you don't know where I got the green dress from? Don't know what made me ask that. But it was there. And I got a letter back to say, oh, your mother sent clothes. And when the children asked where you got them, it was decided to take them off you. And Reverend Mother asked that your mother sent money, which she did, but I don't know what became of it. So I thought, somewhere out there, I'm going to find her. And I kept writing to her, asking questions, and I wrote to Nazareth House. As you know, I got that slip of paper. And then later on, I got a wee fine slip. I don't know who I got it from, but it had to come from Nazareth House. And it said on it, this child placed for adoption with Mrs. Vansborough. So I knew that I'd been adopted. And yet, I ended back up in Nazareth House. So I needed those answers, and I wasn't getting them. And then when I was 37, Sister Elizabeth wrote me a letter, and she said, your mother's in Letterkenny Hospital. And I thought, oh, by God, Jesus, I'm going to kill her. So I asked my 2 friends that I was nursing with to come with me. I don't remember driving down. I remember going into the hospital. Letterkenny Hospital's very big. But all I saw above the door was psychogeriatric. And at that stage I was nursing. And I thought, oh my God, why is everybody blocking my way for me to know my own identity? So the two of them said, come on, Marie, I used to be called. Come on, I'll bring you in. So we goes in, and the old wards, and there was a nurse. And she said, oh yeah, Josie Rogers there, she's sitting up there. And I thought, oh God, I think I should have been more prepared, but I had nobody to go to for help. And we went over to this woman, and that's when I looked at her and thought to myself, God forgive you. You brought a child into this world and you bloody well dumped her. But I didn't know she was paying money for those years. I didn't know that. But that money was of no use. I needed a mother. Anyway, she was far gone. There was no communication. And then suddenly a lady shouted from the other side of the ward, oh, she said, Nuala. And she was shouting Nuala. And Margaret, I'm sure my two friends, Margaret, she's the gift of the gab. And she said, I think she's speaking to you. And I said, oh, Alice, I didn't want to step on toes. All I wanted to know was why I was placed for adoption and who the hell took me back and put me in that hellhole. That's all I could describe it. Where children were dumped simply because they were born out of wedlock. But I looked at this woman who called Nuala, and when she saw me, she said, oh. And she stared at me, she said, Nuala. And I said, no. But Margaret, she started talking to her. And she said, who's Nuala? She said, Nuala's her daughter. And I thought, oh gee, I have a sister. I mean, I knew nothing. Many's a bowl of soup she gave me. And I thought, well, she didn't give me the daylight. And I thought, I have to get out of here. Alice, I did go secretly again. I thought, maybe if I go, she'll answer me. Maybe she'll tell me why. And one day I rang up and I asked about her. And the nurse said, oh, you know, her brother from Downing's was in. That went in there. And I wrote to her from Downing's. Downing's could have been in Africa. I hadn't got a clue. And I got a reply in less than a week. Can imagine, he must have been shocked. He's a GP, was, Lord have mercy on him. And he was a GP in Downing's, which is in Donegal. And he didn't know that my mother was pregnant because he was studying medicine in England. So he didn't know. And the only person I think knew was her sister Annie. Now I went to stay with, and then found out Josie didn't have one child. She had two. She had a child before me. And the child was put in the car with my mother. I got it from the horse's mouth, so to speak. My mother, Aunt Annie, my mother's sister, my grandmother, and Uncle Dan said, who was a hard woman. I don't know why women were so bloody hard. Anyway, and they had the infant and transferred the infant from one car to another. Cars went their own way, and that child was privately adopted. And she's 5 years older than me. I don't know how much she knew, but she did find out about me before Uncle Dan started to develop dementia. I begged him to give me her contact details. I wrote to her, and I got a nice enough letter. But there was nothing there, if that makes sense, even though I didn't know what a family was. There was the girl, there was no bond, and it wasn't her fault, it wasn't mine. And I asked her, did she go to see her mother? And she said no. I had no interest in going to see her. I had, because I wanted the answers. So that was dead. Then I started writing back to Nazareth House, trying to find out why I was adopted and why I was taken back. And I'm hitting a blank wall. I'm hitting a blank wall. Bar that wee slip of paper and the other piece. I can't get any answers. So the other day, Michelle's going to laugh at this. I contacted the bishop's office and I thought, you better get me help. No. He didn't answer the phone, it was a secretary. And I said, I want to speak to him. No. But a few days later, I got a phone call from a man, I don't know what his position was. He was very nice. And he said, if you're looking for the records, we can't do anything about that. But you go to the highest of the order. And the order is the Sisters of Nazareth, and they have higher than a Mother Superior. He said the name, but I couldn't remember it. I can't remember the name. And that's where I'm left. I can't find out. And I need to... Anyway, in the writing of the book, on the last chapter, I was out for a run with my friend, Bernie. And we were out in County Down. She comes from Downpatrick. And we were driving along, and I saw a sign for Ansborough. And I said, oh Jesus, Bernie, there's Ansborough. She says, don't. Bernie was always scared, to rock the boat. No, I got to the stage where I needed to rock the boat. So we drove in to like a cul-de-sac, it was square, and little greenery in the middle. And there was a woman out there in a garden. And I drove over and Bernie says, oh geez. I said, Bernie, stay out of it. And I called the woman over and I said, you wouldn't be any chance, no, Mr. and Mrs. I do, surely, she said, they're over in the corner. My heart missed a beat. Now Bernie's brother was with us, Eamon. And Eamon says, come on, I'll go with you. And drove around over to the corner and we rapped the door. And this lady came out and she said, hello. And I said, I'm looking for Mr. and Mrs. Hi, that'll be them. She says, I'm just a neighbour. I said, oh, would you excuse us a wee minute? So I didn't want to embarrass the lady. And the wee lady and her husband were both in recliners. And they were quite elderly. I don't know what the lady's name was. They were lovely. He is the son of the lady that adopted me, supposedly. And he was 12, 13 when I was a baby there. Wow. And she was a local lady who married into the and knew everything. They were so lovely. And I said, listen, you may wonder why we're here. I didn't know how to start, and I thought, oh Jesus. I thought I was going to take a heart attack. And I said, I know you wouldn't be the Mr. and Mrs. that took a baby in from Belfast. And the lady said, oh my God, the Belfast baby. And I said, well, that's why I'm looking for Mrs. I presume she's long gone. The man said, but I'm her son. And that's when I said, I'm not Belfast baby. And gee, the two of them screamed. And they broke down. So did I. I said to Eamon, oh Jesus, Eamon, I don't know how I could take this. They were lovely. And he remembered me. And he said, you see that house over in the other corner? That's where you were for the first part of your life. And showed me the house. And called the neighbour in, and they took me over to see it. I couldn't believe it. And that was the last part of the chapter. And the poor lady said to me, did your mommy and daddy get married? And I said, no. And she said, where did you go? I said, I went back to Belfast, all right, but I went into an orphanage. And they cried sore. They cried sore now. I just thought, oh, I've annoyed them. I felt I'd really annoyed them, but I needed to know. Before I leave this earth, I need to have those answers. And after I leave, Michelle can take over.